Today on Understanding Immigration, Protecting Children from the Border Crisis. Today on the podcast, we met with Sweetwater County, Wyoming sheriff and county attorney to talk about a case that just happened in their own town. I will say before the podcast starts, the story is a little graphic, so viewer discretion is advised. The sheriff and the county attorney go in depth about a story where an 8-year-old inside of their county was sexually assaulted by an illegal alien who actually came across the border as a getaway. These are crimes that are happening in our communities every single day, and we decided to go a little more in depth so people have an actual taste of what is going on. Thank you so much for tuning in, and here's the podcast. Hello, folks, and welcome into Understanding Immigration. With me today, I have Sweetwater County Sheriff Grossnickle and County Attorney Erramouspe. They're talking a little bit about a case that has been going on inside of their county about an 8-year-old girl who, her and her family, after a horrible attack on the girl, I wanted to talk a little bit about a previously deported, convicted sex offender illegal alien who was in Wyoming after carrying a Washington state driver's license and was able to secure employment inside of Wyoming with a local oil company because of that. Sheriff and county attorney, do you guys have, what do you want to tell me about the story? I'm not sure if you guys have something planned. Take the floor, please. We'd love to hear a little bit more about it.
I'll take this, John. On June 1st, 2021, the sheriff's office received a report or a call from a local hospital about an 8-year-old girl with a possible sexual assault. Detective Jeff Sheeman attended, went up to the hospital, was able to meet with the 8-year-old girl. Very traumatized child, but basically explained to the detective that her uncle, a man by the name of Luis Saavedra, had sexually assaulted her. I mean, she didn't use those words, but she talked about being touched by him. He took her in a truck and touched her. She went into an investigation or went into the emergency room where she was examined, and she had severe tears to her genitalia. Eventually, she was taken to Primary Children's Hospital at the University of Utah, where she underwent surgery to fix those tears. In the process, the sheriff's office interviewed Mr. Saavedra, made the arrest on Mr. Saavedra the same day. So this all happened on June 1st. It's rare that we see something that's boom, boom like this, and where a sexual assault occurs and we have immediate access to the defendant without doing a huge, long, drawn-out investigation. So it was just great work by the sheriff's office. Eventually, the little girl was healed. When she came back into town, she was able to, the sheriff's office did what's called a CAD interview, and it's basically a forensic interview of a child that is monitored, and it's done in an appropriate way so as not to what we refer to as taint the child's testimony. And in that CAD interview, the small child was able to give a little bit more information. And basically what happened was that this she called him her uncle, although it's not a biological uncle. It's just Mr. Saavedra dates her aunt. And basically he had come to her house to pick her up to go get McDonald's. She was there with her 14-year-old brother. He leaves the brother, takes the small child. They go to McDonald's. And on the way back, he pulls into an abandoned where Schlumberger oil company used to have their business in Sweetwater County. It's been abandoned for a while now. When the boom dropped off, he parked back there, moved her to the back seat of the truck, the work truck that he was in, and sexually assaulted her. The tough part about this case is this child was talking about how she tried to get away. She was screaming for help, and she thought somebody would come, but nobody would come to help her. When she tried to open the door, he slammed the door, locked the door, and brutally assaulted her. He then gave her a rag, told her to clean up, and threw the rag outside the window, then dropped her off back home, brought in a hamburger for her brother and said, "Don't tell anybody," and left. It's interesting. 2 days later, as she was coming back from the hospital, she was driving with her mom. She didn't know the place where he took her. As they drove past the Schlumberger building. She said, that's the place. That's the place. So they called sheriff's office. Detective Sheeman arrived on the scene, and lo and behold, the rag was still there, despite being out there 2-3 days, and able to take the rag into testimony, or take the rag into evidence. Sent it to the crime lab, and it came back with Saavedra's semen, as well as the DNA from the blood of the little girl on the rag. And so we charged him with first-degree sexual assault of a minor, aggravated kidnapping, actually 2 counts, because there was primary children were able to discern that there were 2 forms of intrusion, one on the vagina, one on the anus. And she suffered slight tears on the anus as well. And after a lengthy sentencing, the judge imposed a sentence of 125 years for Mr. Saavedra.
Okay, so he's behind bars now. Is that what I'm understanding?
He is behind bars, and he will most likely die behind bars.
Okay. And now I'm curious, one of the focuses main here at FAIR, obviously, is we focus a lot on the immigration aspect of these issues. Is there a place where he would be deported since he's here illegally, or is he here, behind bars on the U.S. taxpayer dime on top of these atrocities that he committed?
He will be here on the taxpayer dime. One of the problems we had is that Mr. Saavedra was a sex offender from 2001 in a neighboring county. He was convicted of immodest and indecent liberties with a minor. He did a small jail sentence and then deported him, and that's sad to say, but that happens quite a bit, in the sense that we know he's going to get deported. I shouldn't say we, but prosecutions, the state knows he's going to get deported, so they give him a small sentence, and then he leaves. We had spoken with immigration, and they said, we have notes that we actually watched him cross across when we dropped him off at the border. We watched him walk across the border. Well, he just turned around and came right back, and we don't know when he came back. We don't know how long he'd been here, but he had employment up here in Wyoming. So he had designs, and he was thinking that in this particular case, the same thing was going to happen to him, that he was going to do a small sentence and he was going to be deported. We know this through his jail calls. We were able to listen to his jail calls. And actually, in one of the jail calls, he talked about, once I get deported, I'm just going to come right back because, I've lived here most of my life. So it was his intention that he was just going to come right back if he got deported again.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, that's something that we've been witnessing here, and something that we report on a lot is the fact that, not only do we have people who are coming across, once people get sent back, they end up coming across again and again and again. And from the sounds of it, the way that he was able to get up to Washington, get this driver's license, was almost like he came up as a gotaway. He wasn't caught by Border Patrol the second time around, from my understanding. So, I mean, we have people who are coming across who we're not even able to track. We're not able to stop them when they come because of the massive flow that we have. Quick question for Sheriff Grossnickle over there. When you are evaluating this case, you have a suspect in custody. Does it make the sort of trying to find him, trying to track him down, does that make it harder on your end when we don't have him documented inside of the United States as a citizen, and we don't have sort of a background on him?
It absolutely does. In fact, in this case, through some investigation that we had done here in the county, we knew Mr. Saavedra was somewhere in the area because of a license plate reader. And for over a year, along with the Marshals Service, we were trying to track him down, and were unable to because we had nothing concrete that was documented of where he would be. There's a couple times that some of our detectives and staff had observed his vehicle, and we just could not find him. And unfortunately, this was the outcome. Because, like you said, we didn't have documentation of where he was or where he could be. If he had that documentation and he would have been employed legally through a company, it would have been a lot easier to find him. Everybody knows that.
Mm-hmm. So even though he had the driver's license, he was still illegally employed by this company?
Correct.
Okay, I gotcha. Now, how do you guys work together to sort of figure out? I mean, there's a lot of moving different parts here. Do you go, straight to the attorney's office and you say, we don't have really a lot of documentation on this guy. We don't know how this all adds up. And then you guys are able to put it together, so to speak? Or how do we end up coming to the conclusion, finding this guy and actually putting him away?
Again, like County Attorney Erramouspe indicated, it was great police work. We work well with the county attorney's office, and that's our ultimate goal, is to keep our citizens safe from perpetrators like this. And sometimes it's luck when everything comes together. Had the mother and the victim not driven past that business, we may never have gotten that piece of evidence. But in 27 years of police work, sometimes you do need luck, but everything came together, all the pieces came together. And that's one of the things I look at is as bad as this crime was, there has to be positive outcomes, and him being in prison is a positive outcome, but being able to tell this story of undocumented criminals coming back across the border and reoffending, our country needs to know this and know how big of an issue it is. It just doesn't stop at the border. Our open borders come all the way up to the middle of our country in Sweetwater County, or Rock Springs, Wyoming. And it's something that all the citizens in this country need to understand, that it's only going to get worse before it gets better if something isn't changed.
Yeah, of course. And, something we say here in Washington a lot is, every state is a border state. I mean, everywhere you go, you have these crimes. I mean, you're up in Wyoming, you're up in Washington, either of these places where this illegal alien was residing. It's so far away from the border, and yet it's still so close to our face. Something I'm curious about is this an isolated crime for you guys? Is this, having someone who's undocumented in the area who's causing these crimes? Is this a brand new thing? Is this something you guys have experienced before, or we noticed an uptick in this type of activity?
I think it's I wouldn't say it's an uptick. It's always been there. We've always had this aspect. DUIs are very prevalent with some undocumented aliens coming up here, and crimes of violence do occur. This is the worst I've seen. This is one of the worst cases I've seen in 26 years of practicing law. And the thing about, you could do quite a bit of legislation. Like, for instance, we have like most states, like I think all states have a registry for sex offenders, but that can only apply to people up here legally that want to stay here legally. And it can only apply to citizens of the United States. When you have an illegal alien who's supposed to register as a sex offender, she's just not going to, know, and so there's no,
so it's completely ineffective.
He's going to get deported,
Yeah. It's ineffective in tracking them, and it's ineffective in, figuring it out, because we have just this flow over. And, I know, and I keep focusing on this driver's license because I feel like it's just so surreal that someone's able to get this documentation inside of the country. And not only does it affect where the state is where they're receiving it, but the fact that they're able to move into other states and now they have some sort of legal documentation while they're here while they're undocumented. It's just kind of a surreal concept to me. So what I'm curious about is, when you see people, do you see a lot of people with driver's licenses from out of state, or do you think these type of licenses, giving out documentation to people who are undocumented, who don't have their full citizenship, is this something that makes it sort of easier for these crimes to happen? Does it make it easier for them to get into the country and stay into the country, or have you guys noticed an uptick in people having driver's licenses who are undocumented?
Speaking from a law enforcement aspect, there has been an increase of documentation of other states that have these the licenses that they're just handing out. When I first started a few decades ago, you would see Mexican driver's licenses, you would see green cards, things of that nature. Now you're just seeing driver's licenses from states that are in the the northwest part of the United States. And what's really frustrating, as somebody that's lived here in Wyoming all my life, is I still have to take 3 forms of documentation to not even just get a driver's license, but to renew my driver's license. So it's very frustrating when you see that. And yes, there has been an increase of what seems to be a legitimate form of identification from the United States on people that are undocumented.
Yeah. Do you think that these crimes would cut down more if these weren't initiatives which were being passed throughout different states? And I think there's at least around 8-9 states in the country right now that have these types of laws where undocumented people are able to get driver's licenses. Do you think if these weren't available, we would see less crime?
Well, I definitely think that this particular crime could have been avoided, because, if he doesn't have proper documentation and he can't get a job, then he's definitely a little bit less likely to be up here. And when you can get a job and work and with a driver's license that doesn't require any specific background, and you're supposed to register as a sex offender, but you don't have to because you got this fake ID or this ID that gives you credence. That's how you get away with stuff. And it's you could talk about kids getting a fake ID in college to be able to go drink and do anything else that they want to do when they're under the age of 21. It's a license to do what you want. And I think anytime you give credibility to somebody up here, somebody who's here illegally, that they're going to tend to feel that they can do a little bit more than somebody that is here legally, that is responsible for making sure that they can keep their job and keep their livelihood going.
Yeah, yeah. And it seems like it's really just, these policy decisions are the ones which are making it easier for people to get these. I mean, like you said, you don't have to go to the route of trying to get a fake one where you could get a real one from a lot of these states. It's absolutely wild. So, these open borders, not only do they allow people to come across our border who had previous criminal records, we're also talking about, this got away problem that we touched on a little bit earlier. Do you guys, is it often that you experience people who have come re-entered across our border and weren't caught again, and then you guys find them, and it's like, you call up ICE and say, this guy's here. I'm not sure if he's caught him this time when he was coming across the border. Is there anything we could do to try to remedy the situation?
What's crazy about that is I've seen the progression, and it depends what administration's in office. Before President Trump, I can tell you, for instance, there was a van that we had stopped that was loaded with undocumented citizens, and at that time it was hands off. So we had to allow a van that had 17 people crammed in it to go on their way. During President Trump's administration, it was a lot easier to get cooperation from Homeland Security investigators, and they were out here often visiting us. And we would be going to residents where we knew that there was undocumented that had entered the country illegally that were criminals. And we would take enforcement action or give them the information they needed so they could take enforcement action. Now it's a handoff approach again. Here at our local jail, we house 4 ICE while they're being transported from one facility to another. And that number has almost gone away from where it was just 2 years ago. There's still some there, but not nearly the numbers that we had seen before. So it has changed, and it just depends on what administration and what their policies are.
Of course. So would you say, like during the Obama years, there was, more people coming across? Trump years, you say it dumps down a little bit. And then in the Biden years, we see a little bit more of this increase in crossings. We have people who are coming across who are committing crimes like we're talking about right now. We have drugs flowing across. Do we see this as, the next 2 years are coming along, as this is going to, Title 42, I'm sure you guys know about that, ending? When it does, we're going to see a dramatic increase in this kind of activity is what we're looking at, right?
I would think so. When you're talking 15,000 a day possibly, and there's just no good answer or good solution or good consequence that's going to occur when you have that influx. I mean, and it's going to make its way up here. It's going to make its way up even to the little Wyoming. We have the largest section of I-80 that runs across the United States. It's in our jurisdiction. We have the 8th largest geographical county in the United States. And so there's a lot of traffic that goes through this county. I-80 is just a massive thoroughfare. And then we have 25 coming up from the south, and that hits into Salt Lake, and then which hooks up to I-80. So we're at the crux of it. And to imagine that this is all stemming from that southern border and coming up, we can only expect that things are going to get much, much worse.
Yeah, and with the highways crossing there, I could only imagine the kind of trafficking that there is. I mean, whether it's trafficking or drug trafficking, both of them. I mean, there's such an increase, and I mean, almost we're seeing right now a rate of 107,000 Americans yearly, mostly youth, are dying from illicit narcotics crossing our border. Fair did a study where we found that there were more people that died in the past year from fentanyl overdoses than died of COVID, died of car accidents, all these things that we're more attuned to hearing young people dying from. Fentanyl is now overtaking this because, and the only reason I could think to see is because of this open border. Have you guys noticed more drugs in the community, more fentanyl in the community, types of overdoses and things like this that you wouldn't have previously with the change of the administration and the opening of the border?
There has. Oh, go ahead, John. You're
A
the man
mutual
on the
yes.
street.
Yeah, I
Well,
could see that.
I'll let Danny talk about it a little bit too, but yes, we have. And I always say Wyoming's a few years behind the rest of the nation, but we have seen an increase of overdoses. We've seen an increase of the use of naloxone also, to the point of we're taking the precautions and just like anybody else would in the United States. And as the county attorney said, we have 150 miles of Interstate 80 that goes through our county, and they've done a count of 36,000 vehicles that go through our county a day. So it's a main thoroughfare. We have a highway that comes straight up from Mexico that comes straight into our jurisdiction, and then it's once you hit our county, you're 55 miles until you hit I-80, and then it's east to west as fast as you want to go.
And we're seeing these cases come in where fentanyl, we can't necessarily track it all the way down to the border, but I mean there's an assumption that it's, since that's the main influx of it, that's where it's coming from. And we're in a position where we're just dealing with what we have locally as far as who's using, who's dealing, the overdoses on that we can't, like most states, we're helpless on the influx. I mean, how do you stop something that's coming from far, far away into your community? You can only deal with bailing the boat out with your, red Solo cup and hope that, somebody stops the flow of water in eventually.
Yeah, no, that's terrible, and it's so baffling to me how it's just gotten so bad. Even in places, like Wyoming, we're seeing this crisis come to really the front door and knock on your guys' door, where you have to deal with these problems and deal with the consequences of what's coming across. One last thing I kind of wanted to ask you guys to kind of get your ideas would be, from a local perspective, we talk a lot here, to different people who, whether they're national reporters, whether they're congressional members, things like that, we get a lot of a national perspective on what could be done to try to fix this problem. Do you guys have a different take from a local perspective, just seeing inside of your community, things that could be done to try to stop these atrocities from happening and try to curb these crimes?
Well, I'm not going to speak for Danny, but I know Danny and his family, but I'll speak for my family. Everybody talks about immigration reform, and it needs to go back down to the very basic levels it was. And when people look at the history, they understand the border crossings and things like that when they become familiar. But my family on my mom's side came to the United States at the turn of the 20th century, but they came over here legally. And I have no issue with that. And if we're able to do that and vet the criminals, the ones that are going to commit these horrible crimes into our country, that's where it needs to start. And to me, it's very simple. And instead of putting money in other places, let's put it at where we're going to protect our country and those that legally want to come over into our country and become productive citizens, or even if they don't become citizens, become productive within our country. That's where it needs to start. And for this current administration to turn their back on that, and they see it, everybody knows they see it. It isn't what this country is made of. And to me, it's just disgusting.
I would agree with John. We live in a community, Rock Springs, Wyoming, which is in Sweetwater County, is known as their little motto is the home of 58 nationalities. It was built by immigrants. I'm only a second generation citizen. My grandparents were all from Europe and came over here, worked as sheep herders and butchers and all that stuff. They did so legally, And like most of the people in this county, they're second, maybe third generation citizens. All their ancestry is short-lived in the United States. But there's an issue in the sense that we're ignored, like most of the red flyover states, is that the coastal elite, they don't care about what happens here. And we're facing the consequences of their apathy towards keeping the border secure. And we're the ones that are dealing with it. In my office, back in the day, when I say back in the day, it wasn't that long ago, if somebody got an illegal alien received a DUI, one of the arguments for the defense attorney was, he's got to get deported. Let's give the guy a break. And sometimes that would happen, is that you give him a break because he has a job, he's got family up here, but you don't want him to get deported. Well, that in my office, it's an aggravating factor if he's here illegally. And we don't give breaks based on the fact that something traumatic is going to happen to him and his family. It's the only thing we can do. John and I are charged with keeping the people of Sweetwater County safe. I'm unapologetic when it comes to public safety of our community. And I think you need local leaders in every county. It starts there, in every county, in every city, to take into consideration the factors that affect their ability to keep their local citizenry safe. And if we start doing that, then maybe it'll climb up the chain a little bit. I think sometimes even the local leaders tend to turn a blind eye to what's actually happening and how it affects their own citizens.
Of course. Well, I could tell you, coming from me and coming from all of our listeners here, we appreciate all the work that you guys are doing and making sure that the streets are safe, making sure that you're, cleaning up the streets, making sure that these crimes aren't happening, and we're trying to see some kind of downturn, even though you guys are up against the lot. I know you guys are working tirelessly and making sure that the people of your county, and I mean the people of really the whole country with those highways coming through, are staying safe. So really, really thank you for all that. If there was a place where people wanted to either follow this case or follow what you guys are up to, see some of the different arrests you're doing, the things you're finding in your county, is there a place they could find you, Twitter, Facebook, anything like that?
Sheriff's Office, we have Sweetwater County, Wyoming Sheriff's Office Facebook page. That's where they can keep track of what we're doing here in Sweetwater County and keep track of this case also. Here in the near future, we've had an outpouring of people that want to help the family because of the costs that have been incurred from this crime. So if they want to look there, we'll be having something in the near future that people can reach out and see that. But we always encourage people to see what's going on in the middle of our country. They call it God's perfect square, and that's the state of Wyoming, and Sweetwater County is the best county within Wyoming. And like Danny said, we want to keep it that way, and we encourage people to come check it out.
Of course. Well, thank you guys so much for joining the program, everyone. Of course, you could catch this podcast on YouTube, on Rumble, of course, anywhere where podcast could be listened to, Spotify, Google, Apple. Feel free to follow FAIR on Facebook, at FAIR Immigration on Twitter and Instagram. And we look forward to you guys joining us on the next show. Thanks so much for coming on again, County Attorney and Sheriff. We appreciate you having Ron, and we appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you so much.